So today we're joined by Mandy
Kennedy.
Kennedy.
Yes, I just recently changed my name. That's why there was a hesitation.
Thanks for joining us. So as Tim said in the intro, we're going to talk all things stress management, how we can sort of apply some stress management techniques to better ourselves in the workplace. But before we do, Mandy, can we just maybe get a bit of info about yourself?
Of course.
Can we go back to sort of where you grew up, how you grew up, and sort of your journey into how you found yourself talking about stress?
Absolutely. Well, my maiden name is Watney, and most coppers will know me as Watney because I was in the police for QPS for 18 years with that surname. But growing up, I'm the oldest of 11 children. So that's a stressful environment to start with. I survived that, so that was a win. Gives me a bit of credibility and and legitimacy talking in this space. But we grew up in the country, a lot of freedom, a lot of stupid motorbike accidents, you know, your typical country kid stupidity kind of stuff, made bombs. As it turned out, I ended up specialising in bomb scene management and then did a stint relieving as the OIC of bomb squad for a bit. So, you know, all these things end up coming around in your adult life. But when I was 15, 14 probably, year 9, 10, I decided I wanted to be a forensic scientist. I decided I wanted to be a sworn police officer so that I could do crime scene examination, and that's exactly what I did. I went to uni, got my undergrad, went to the police, was in frontline for about 8 years, just in City, Valley, and then out country service out at Emerald. And then came back and spent the last decade in a scientific section, which just does major crime, homicides, rapes, explosions, fire investigation. So knew a lot of you all guys through the fire investigation, through our hazardous environment examination team. We worked with Jason and his team from Hazmat through G20 and a lot of those major kind of events. So, yeah, that's pretty much my life in a nutshell.
So what drove you down the stress management path, as in obviously being exposed to that world in the police force? Was there something that, like a job or an incident where you thought, wow, I need to really focus on my stress management, or how did that play out?
I think it was the job just in general. As I said, I just always wanted to be a forensic scientist, and I thought the hardest part was getting there. It wasn't until I got there that I realised the hardest part was actually staying there, and staying there with the mental capacity that I wanted to have, not losing my caring, nurturing nature, which a lot of people that I would work with go, piss off, she was not. but there were aspects that I could see slipping away of my character. People that knew me before I joined and after I joined, obviously I got a lot more confidence. I was a shy kid at school, wouldn't even speak to anyone. Now you can't shut me up, as you guys well know. And I think for me, it was understanding that I don't make sound decisions when I'm stressed, and I'm one of those people, those people that want to be good at whatever they do, and so I couldn't allow myself to have stress diminish my performance. So I started kind of like intuitively, instinctively going, oh, this just got to be a better way of living, and started exploring meditation, mindfulness. Went into breathwork. Breathwork's probably my favorite thing to do, still is my favorite thing to do. Started exploring like the mental, emotional states of people. I was very emotionally curious as to what drove people. And I also was very curious as to why some people would react with a trauma response in situations and some people wouldn't. And I myself often would go, why don't I feel anything? Like, why is that person upset? And I just feel excited that, you know, I would come to work hoping someone was murdered overnight so I'd get something to do. Like, that's not a normal person. So I started going, well, am I the weirdo? Like, am I the psychopath? Turns out I am a psychopath, but not in the end up in jail kind of way. There's like this narrow, thin line where you're like, you can use your psychopathy for good and you can use it for bad. And I think I fortunately fell on the good side just. And so wanting to perform really well as a forensic scientist and just keep my vitality. I love doing a lot of outdoor activities, nature, all that kind of stuff. That I think innately got me through to keep my well-being at a bit more of a higher level. But it wasn't until that, 12-year mark, when you kind of start to go, oh, the job is sucked. Like it's screwed, management's screwed, ELT's screwed, like, you know, and then you start going down that typical copper, jaded, cynical route. And I did not want to do that. I wanted to make sure that I was always a very positive person. I kept that positive mindset, but I could see myself falling down into the drama, into the disheartened, disengagement. And one thing that I have always said to myself, I would never stay anywhere I wasn't passionate to stay. And that was it. Eventually, my decision to leave. I was very passionate about forensic science, did a lot of extra things outside of my core business because of my passion. But then when I started seeing the well-being, my passion for well-being kind of rise and overtake my passion for forensics, I was like, okay, it's time for me to follow that and leave that other passion. So I was very lucky. I left at the peak of my mental health and well-being to make like really easy, sound decisions where it didn't later affect me. The detachment from the identity of being a police officer, from being a forensic scientist, that transition out wasn't hard for me because I kind of already worked through that before I left. Starting my own business, that was another story, very stressful, but it was because I had all those well-being strategies to make the sound decision. I wasn't making it to get away from something. I was making it to go towards something. And that was the difference. I wasn't making a stressed-based situation or a fear-based situation. I was making a passion-based decision.
I guess, too, the key to all that is you were fortunate enough to recognise your change in personality, whereas some people get so deep into it.
Absolutely.
That maybe they've missed that opportunity to pull back and say, hey, this is not normally me. And I think there's probably a handful of people out there that can't get to that stage.
Yeah.
So we're trying to set this up to help people before that. Lucky enough for you recognise.
Well, and you know what? It was direct, difficult conversations by people that I respected and valued that were willing and strong enough to have those conversations with me, where the most critical thing, I think it was my mum. She said, well, Mandy, you're the common denominator in all these problems. And I was like, oh, yes. I don't want to hear that, but you're right. And so, I noticed that I was in a lot of conflict in work, out of work, in family. I'd gone through a divorce. So all those kind of life-changing things that happen that make you, we only learn when we're, at the bottom kind of thing, when we're hurting. We only learn from the discomfort and the pain. And I love pain. I call pain the master teacher. And it was there to teach me, you are actually the common denominator. So that's when I started going down that ownership route, which a lot of people misconstrue ownership as, well, you're taking blame, you're taking fault, and it's not about that at all. Empowered ownership is about acknowledging where your control is and where it is not, and then focusing only on that which you can control and that which you can influence, and knowing the difference between the two.
Excellent.
Well, Mandy, it's really great to hear your story leading up to here, and it's very clear that you're the right person to be sitting here talking to us about all of this. And your awareness is amazing around your own journey. So thank you for sharing
pleasure.
that with us. So let's sort of start with what is stress and how does it affect people? And then we can go from there into how we can start improving our management of that.
Yeah, of course. Well, just to be clear, I have got no formal qualifications other than that I looked into it for myself. I realized I was in a stressful state and I did my own self-education, but more importantly, I applied it to myself, embodied it, and it worked and it made me feel better. So that's kind of like my life, my qualifications, I guess you'd call it. I'm not a psychologist. I'm a forensic scientist. But stress, to put it very simply, is the release of neurotransmitters that create either the stress response. Everyone knows what the stress response is in terms of fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. I don't know if you guys have fawn. I know the QPS use that fawn, like just cowering kind of state. But stress is also good. Stress is your body's ability to be motivated to take action and attention. So stress often gets a bad rap in that it is negatively perceived as the thing that is causing everyone pain and discomfort. But that's just imbalanced stress. Optimal stress, normal daily stress is needed. We wouldn't do anything. We wouldn't be motivated to do anything if we didn't have stress in our body. So stress is a part of the autonomic nervous system, and our autonomic nervous system controls those functions of our bodies that we don't necessarily have direct conscious control over, like your breathing, your digestion, your immunity, your heart rate. Having said that, breathing is also controlled consciousness. We'll get into that a bit later. But just to focus on stress, stress is just the release of neurotransmitters that spark you to action. And the intensity will vary, and the length of time will vary, and the intensity and length of time will kind of dictate whether that stress goes beyond what is good or optimal for you into non-beneficial stress, and also whether it will go into an amygdala activation, which a lot of people would have heard about. The amygdalas in the brain that will get fired if your stress is intense and prolonged enough for that part of the brain to be activated. And we can get into that a bit later on. And so when we're talking about the autonomic nervous system, we do have 3 branches, but we're going to probably focus just on the 2 main important ones, which are your sympathetic and your parasympathetic nervous system. Is that something that you guys get taught in the fire service?
No, not officially. I think the majority of the learnings that we would have would be similar to what you're saying, just
self-educated, yeah. And honestly, one thing I know, and this is these organisations have an obligation, workplace health and safety obligation, to provide certain services for us. However, they cannot do the work for us. It is up to us to do the work. So that was something that when I stopped going, well, the QPS should do this for me, the QPS should do that, they're not doing any of this. At the end of the day, it's like going to the gym. The QPS can't go to the gym for me so that I get fit, nor can they do this mental health and wellness work for me to have that balance. So it's incumbent on each individual to do their own work, and if that means self-education, then so be it. And so I was happy to do that self-education because I didn't really feel like we had enough time to learn all the stuff that you needed to learn and understand about your body. And there isn't. When you're required to and you're paid to do a particular job, then that becomes your core business, and that's what you're expected to do. That's what you're getting paid to do. So this is the stuff where when you choose to put on that uniform, you actually have to also choose to make sure that your mindset, your mental health and your well-being is a priority for you, so you can bring your best version to every shift. And that's my mind. That's my ownership mindset on that topic. So getting back to our autonomic nervous system, where we have the sympathetic and the parasympathetic branches, the sympathetic is where you have your activity and attention, your fight, flight, freeze, fawn response. And the parasympathetic is where you have your rest and digest, that more calming phase. And what people may not understand is it's about balancing those. It's about having, for a balanced autonomic nervous system, you have to have both in equal proportions. We are very good at being in action. We are very good at being in activity. When we are in constant action and activity, we're not very good at being aware of how long we are in that to make sure that we counterbalance that with the right parasympathetic, because it doesn't really cause us stress. We think of stress and going, oh, that was a stressful, I almost got into a car accident, that was stressful. But constant go, those constant high achievers that are constantly doing this project and doing that project and then doing this and committing to that and just never shutting down, they're going home and doing work at home, they're the ones at just as great a risk, even though none of that is causing an acute stressful experience emotionally for them. That constant prolonged bout of attention activity is them being in their sympathetic nervous system for so long without a balance of the parasympathetic nervous system. So that can cause the imbalance without actually feeling. And that's something that I noticed. So what I use now to recognize whether I need to have a shift in my balance, because I think we've had that much stress inoculation. I think you guys would be the same, that you're so used to being in that hyper active state that you actually, it's just normal for you. And it's like a frog jumping into a pot of water and slowly bringing it to boil. It doesn't know to jump out. But when it's boiling and another frog jumps in, it jumps straight out because it knows. So I think we first responders get that same kind of gradual, slow burn. You don't see the signs. And so what I had to do is start wearing a Garmin. I always wear a Garmin, but just those trackable wearables where it tracks my heart rate, it tracks my breath rate and it tracks my HRV. HRV is a good indicator of a balanced autonomic nervous system, and we can get into that a little bit later on as to why that is. But those were the metrics that I physically needed to be able to see to know that, my body's not balanced. My autonomic nervous system is not balanced at the moment.
Sorry, Mandy. So you're just talking about, those big stressful events that we might come across. What about, is there other factors as well, like that is cumulative stress as well, that we, as first responders, you mentioned that stress inoculation, but other things that might sneak up on us too, stuff at home,
Yeah.
family, financial stuff. Does that all sort of contribute to that, I guess, that
stress picture?
Yeah,
absolutely. And you raise a good point. You guys would have heard or read the book of The Resilient Shield, and talks about the different layers of life. I know you've had Ben Pronk on here, one of the authors, and you're planning on speaking to Dr. Dan Pronk, one of the brothers, another author. I love that framework for first responders because it shows you so many of the different layers that if one of those areas drops down, if those other areas are balanced, you're quite good. Like your stress picture would still be quite good because you've been lifted up by those other areas. What the problem can sometimes be for first responders, especially those that are so invested in their job, is that they put their professional layer, which is one of the layers from the Resilient Shield, like their work layer, in such high regard that they let the others drop away. So then when that drops, like their stress picture is just... It's huge. You add the family stuff to that. It very much all is accumulative. And something that a lot of people also don't know about stress is it's actually a cycle. So the cycle needs to be completed. So after you've experienced stress, whether it's long bouts of activity and attention, or a stressful situation, or a life or death situation, or even just a job that was like full on, you might have been a little bit excited afterwards and gone, yeah, that was a really good job. Even those situations, you need to go, all right, well, now I need to complete that stress cycle, because I was in stress, even though it wasn't detrimental emotion, I didn't have any negative emotional reactions to it. I still have to complete that stress cycle. And there are 6 evidence-based activities that the research has shown will help complete that stress cycle that we should be doing afterwards, as long as a good recovery, and that's where sleep comes very much important. I'm no sleep expert, but I have pretty good sleep because of my stress completion cycle. And so the 6 activities are physical activity, whether it's training, whether it's playing sport, all that kind of stuff. Creativity, anything where you get to, build something with your hands, or just get in that flow state with creativity. That's the perfect thing with creativity. You can just tune out, playing an instrument, listening to music, whatever, drawing, colouring by numbers, all that kind of stuff is part of the creativity. What's the next one? We have... we call it's physical affection, but we call it the tactical hug. So guys are more likely to do that because you do, when you have that connection, when you come home and just hug that loved one, the child, a dog, a horse, all those kinds of things, that will help release the neurotransmitters and the hormones in your body that then help balance out the autonomic nervous system. Because when the sympathetic nervous system is activated, it will release stuff like dopamine, adrenaline, cortisol. We actually also need the ability to release those neurotoxins, or those hormones that go and mop those up, because if they stay in our system, they keep us firing in that sympathetic nervous system. So we need something to go clean that up. And these activities, these parasympathetic nervous activation activities, will help us release those hormones to go mop it all up and make it and clear the system. So we're back at zero. We're back at stasis or balance. There's tears, crying. Again, I know it's not a popular topic for men and they don't normally feel comfortable, but if your autonomic nervous system is that fried, men, you're going to cry whether you like it or not, and potentially at a time that's disproportionate to the emotion that's released as well. So a regular cry session, we can call them tactical tears as well if it makes it more likely that you guys are going to do it. But that is a really good release to send out those hormones that go in and mop up the stuff.
It's interesting with the tears, because I know as a peer support officer, one of the key signs for most, I've heard numerous people say it, they'll just say, I'm just crying at the drop of a hat. And for them, that's a warning sign.
Yep.
But how you're describing it, it's quite fair to say healthy.
Yeah, very healthy.
Wow. Very
healthy. And the reason they think it's unhealthy is because that's the part of them they want to hide. That's a vulnerability they want to hide and repress from the world. And so it's part of the ego. We want to try and put on a front that we show the world this part of ourselves and only this part of ourselves. The other problem with first responders is once they put on this uniform, they also put on this mask that they think protects them. But what they don't realize is there's still a human under that uniform that has to perform the things that normal humans don't have to. There's a normal human with normal human hormones and biological processes under that uniform that needs to be, and as much as you want that mask to be your truth, if it's not, it's detrimental to yourself because you're repressing and hiding those parts of yourself that need to come out. And not only that, it's actually disconnecting you from that humanness that you need to keep doing your job anyway. So yeah, absolutely. If your body's doing it, it's because it's needing it. Yeah, absolutely. So we got up to what was 4? Yep. We've got the 5th one, which is conscious breathing, which we will get into a lot of that a little bit later on. And the 6th one, and I cannot for the life of me remember it off the top of my head. I'll come back to that. But there is a 6th one, and maybe we'll put it in the show notes if I can't remember it. It'll probably be something, can't remember.
We'll get back to that.
Yeah.
Is anybody immune to stress at all?
I don't think so. I don't know everyone, so I can't say no one. I've met this person who's immune to it because this is the thing. If we were to put it in the framework of stimulus and response, because I think first responders understand that really well. There's a stimulus and then there's our response to that stimulus. But what people don't understand is that between the space of stimulus and response is a whole lot of our stuff that goes into play to determine what our response is to that stimulus, and it explains why it's so unique. Whatever's in our space between stimulus and response is unique to each individual, and it explains why 5 people can go to the same incident and have a completely different emotional response out of it, a completely different cognitive response, a completely different mental response. The key aspects is what's in that person's space. So unless you may be talking about those like really Zen gurus out and, who are just in so much control of their mental, emotional, spiritual states, maybe they don't feel stress. But I just have not met anyone that doesn't have something in their space that creates a stressful response from some sort of stimulus.
That's great to hear you say that, because you said before about us putting on a uniform and putting on a mask and essentially feeling like we're immune or we are resilient enough or we're not human enough to feel those emotions. And I think that's quite a common thing in our service, and I'm sure in QPS as well. So it's good to hear you say that no matter what, really, we will feel some of these effects and we need to be mindful of them and put strategies in place to deal with them.
Absolutely. And this is the thing, and you'll learn this in the book Resilience Shoot. If you haven't read it yet, definitely do yourself a favour and go read it. It's written by 3 ex-SAS officers, and it is just brilliant for putting that simplified framework around what first responders experience and how they can break down and make decisions based on their best resilience. And what they say is just like the brain has neuroplasticity, resilience has neuroplasticity, which means it can change. So you can be really resilient in your 20s, and then for whatever reason, certain factors, certain life choices, whatever, you become less resilient in older age. And so it's something that needs to be constantly and proactively worked at in order for you to keep that resilience level high. Resilience can be misinterpreted as well, and because people can say that they become resilient to poor situations. For example, domestic violence. People say that they're resilient because they've learnt to live in those environments. Well, that's not resilience. Resilience I would define as something where you build a barrier, a positive barrier around getting through traumatic experiences. And so, sometimes when you hear people talk about resilience, you're like, yeah, but resilience isn't good because people stay in bad situations with that. That's not the type of resilience I'm talking about. It's the positive benefit.
Resilience is different to fear or stubbornness to leave a situation.
Correct.
Or
coping.
Yeah.
Or just being tough.
Or being tough.
Gritting it out.
Yeah, absolutely. Because gritting it out can actually put your body into stress and release more cortisol than it's actually. And that's why sometimes, for all those gym junkies out there, overtraining is a problem. You know, your sympathetic nervous system is go, go, go if you're not giving it that recovery time. And I don't know how many times anyone that looks into training, theory and understands it knows that the recovery is where the changes actually happen. The workout is where the stress is triggered, but it's the recovery where the neural pathways and the cellular change actually occurs. So you need that parasympathetic rest and digest recovery phase after any stressful situation. And what you'll find is if you give yourself that recovery, the next time you meet a similar situation, you'll meet it better because you've got better stress management, you've got better neural pathways, you've got the change that has occurred but can only recur in that recovery stage.
That recovery stage, I think, is important, even as from a PSO. When's the right time to talk to someone? You know, if they've gone to an incident yesterday, is today the right time, or do we allow them their space? Does that? I guess everyone's different, but
Yeah.
I mean, my biggest fear with that is always, am I getting in too early?
Yeah.
And have I missed the boat 2 weeks down the track?
Yeah.
So it's a real juggling act as to, I guess, exactly what you're saying, that recovery between
Yeah.
each individual.
And look, there is no one right answer for that because, like, if we go back to that stimulus response framework, it really is dependent on what's in their space. And what can be in people's spaces are thoughts, emotions, beliefs, past experiences, perceptions, values, biochemical processes, how their particular body responds to biochemical processes, their ego. And I'm not talking about, arrogance. I'm talking about their attachment to certain identities. So what I mean by that is, like, you know, for example, someone might have an ego around being sick all the time. Like, people wouldn't necessarily go, oh, they're so egoic or they're so egotistical because they constantly say, but if someone is attached to their illness and their diagnosis, that's a part of ego. It's an identity attachment. And so because there's all those, like, multiple variables under each of those subheadings, and then you times that by all the other combination of those other things like values, beliefs, all that kind of stuff, there is no way of actually going, this time frame is the best time frame. So what I suggest in that moment is be there to give one of those stress completion activities. And if that's a tactical hug, let it be a tactical hug. There doesn't need to be talking. There doesn't need to be, tell me about what you're going through. It can just have that physical connection, or just knowing that someone's there, that they're not alone. Yeah, present. And then you will know, I feel like the more present you are with someone, the more you'll know what you're allowed to say from that point on.
Yeah. I got a question in relation to, we've talked a lot about stress, and we had the chat prior to coming on air, and it's what I commonly see in the training world is you'll get someone that outside that can deal with stress of a job or an incident quite well. They're going for their next rank progression and they go to water. It's that assessment, nerves, but seeing it firsthand, it's not just a case of I'm nervous. It absolutely can cripple people.
Absolutely.
And it just blows my mind because it's, as instructors, we're not in, and we keep saying this to them, we're not imposing any pressure.
No.
It's all self-imposed.
Yep.
So can you explain the differences between real life stresses and going into that assessment world, white coat fever situation?
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is just my personal theory based on my mindset ethos. And the difference is, in those life or death situations, they've trained, they know what they're doing. In those situations where people are being assessed, it comes back to, well, what's in their space between stimulus and response? Because that stimulus has occurred for many other people and they've been fine. I love assessments. And I do not know why. I used to love giving evidence in court. Everyone else in my office hated it. I used to love giving interviews for job promotions. Everyone else hated it. And I think it's because what was in my space had changed. And what I mean by that is my belief system when I'm being evaluated was no longer what I realized beforehand. There was a self-limiting belief, and I can't speak for everyone, but just consider exploring this concept. When you're going in front of someone and your peers are assessing you and you want to do well and you want this job and you're attached to a certain outcome, you've got all this pressure on yourself to get it. And then you've got peers or people you know or people maybe you don't know that you've actually, because they're on the panel, the internet, you've put them at a higher hierarchy. So you've actually elevated them above yourself and you've put yourself below. A lot of people at those points have a self-limiting belief that then gets activated. And this is what I found with myself. When I wasn't confident in those situations that I'm now confident with, is because I had a self-limiting belief was I'm not good enough. And that would land, and because it was there in my space and was probably that self-limiting belief, I wouldn't necessarily have the thought I'm not good enough. I would have the feeling. And how I explain that is at some point in my childhood, because they say that a lot of your trauma experience is between the formative ages of 0 and 7 or 0 and 8. And that's when you first experience something like, you're not good enough. I got in trouble. You're not good enough. And then what happens is you trial and error ways to deal with that because you don't want to deal with it again. So you go, okay, well, if I'm not good enough, what do I do? Mine was, okay, I just got to do better. I got to achieve more. So I became a maladaptive high achiever because I had this experience as a child where I didn't feel good enough. And I was like, to avoid that, I'm never not going to be good enough again. That ended up burning me out. So I quickly changed that. But what I had to do was go back to that limiting belief of I'm not good enough and stop overachieving, stop trying to impress people, because then the other thing you're doing by trying to impress people is that you're trying to control their perception of you, your reputation, which you cannot control your reputation. Your reputation only exists in the mind of others. It's not within your control. So you're putting your energy on something, A, you can't control, and B, on a past experience that you have trialed and error a success strategy for. You've found a success strategy for it. You've reinforced that so many times, it's become a subconscious program. Now so much so that when that stimulus arises, you probably go straight to the emotion. You don't recognize the thought, and the emotion was stress. The emotion was, I can't do this. People go to water, and they never actually developed a good success strategy for it in childhood, which means if you gave them their adult mind back, they would be able to nail it. But the problem is the mind can only process 50 bits of data per second, I think it is, the conscious mind. The subconscious mind is something like 60,000. I don't know what the exact numbers. That's the disproportion. It's massive. So what the brain does is it tries to flick as much as it can by generalizing, distorting, or deleting information, so that in any situation, if it doesn't exactly marry up to a previous situation, it will generalize, distort, delete, so it can push it through to that subconscious program so the conscious mind doesn't have to deal with it. And so what a lot of people are dealing with in that moment where they go to water is they're probably reverting back to that childhood strategy
classroom
that doesn't work for them anymore. It's a detrimental pattern. It may have worked for them back then, because back then they may have been stressed and the teacher came up and nurtured them. And so they're like, oh, that worked. And that's what happens with a lot of childhood programs, is that it works then when you're cute and cuddly. As an adult, it's the last thing. And we don't have any programs that run in and clear up those old programs that don't work for us anymore. We've got to experience them. We've got to experience the pain of them to go, oh, shit. And it takes time, it takes mindfulness to sit in the discomfort of that emotion for those thoughts to come up. And that's what I had to do. I was in a section which was, we had highly critical reviews of any of our work, and they would rip you to shred. They would only look at all the faults and bring up all these things. You should have done this, you should have done that. And it's what I would call one of the biggest organizational stresses in my old unit. And it causes a lot of stress. And so it kept pushing on my I'm not good enough. And I didn't realize that until I sat in the discomfort of the emotion. Instead of going, oh, no, I don't care, I push it away, ignore it, I sat in it long enough, and it took me about a day and a half, and then I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't think I'm good enough. And then I'm like, yes, I'm good enough. I've done this, I've done that, I've done this, I can do that. I'm just different. So I was able to replace my I'm not good enough to I'm just different. And if they don't want my difference, that's totally fine. I want to be my difference. And that's how so that's what I then put back into my space. Instead of having the I'm not good enough there, I put it's not right or wrong, I'm just different. I put that back in, and then it didn't matter. And so then you were confident, you didn't revert to that childhood behavior. My childhood behavior was getting aggressive and over dominating people when I didn't feel good enough. That's how I would react, and I found myself doing that a lot. And that's when my mum said, you sound like the common denominator here, and I absolutely was. So that's what's in people's space. But like, that was for me. It's not necessarily for everyone. That was just an example to go, well, sometimes you just got to explore what's in that space, and the only way you can explore what's in that space is by sitting in that uncomfortable feeling. You can do things like self-reflection, but a lot of people find that really hard. They end up ruminating. So I like the process of intuitive journaling, just writing and not letting your pen stop for 3 pages. By that, it doesn't give you time to stop and think what you're going to write. You just let it come out, and that I found the most pivotal process in uncovering some of these self-limiting beliefs.
Wow.
So I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, and it's interesting because you see so many different levels of behaviour when someone's stressed, and I think Ben Pronk mentions it wonderfully in the intro to our last podcast, where that IED explosion and just seeing the behaviours of his whole team, which has really tapped into that. Where's everyone's resilience sit? And I think it's a perfect place to see stress at its best.
Yeah.
It's just so many people act differently.
Absolutely. And the thing with stress is that not only do people act differently with stress, but so some people may not need to have as long a recovery period afterwards. That was one thing I noticed. I started judging myself for not having normal, like for being able to go to homicides, for being able to go to dead children, to abused children, and just not feel anything. I'm like, well, what's wrong with me? I'm a woman. I should surely feel something. And then I'm like, oh, I'm a psychopath. And I actually speak to Dan Pronk about this because he looked into the same thing. And there is this thing called psychopathy, but it can be positive or negative. And they do, I think they recruit first responders with elements of psychopathy, because you have to have that ability to disconnect emotionally from jobs to be able to stay out of the stress, to stay in your executive function, which we can talk about after this. But you need to have that high cognitive function in stressful situations where people normally shut down and go to water. First responders can't have that. Our organisation doesn't, and a community expects us not to have that. And so there is some benefits from it. There are also some negatives for it. In the social settings, I was very emotionally disconnected. I was what they would call an emotional retard. Like, I was like, well, that's not stressful. Why are you stressed? Like, there's this lack of empathy, I guess, for everyday normal people kind of stresses. And so there's 2 sides to the coin. And whilst it works really well in a professional setting, it does not work really well in a social setting. Or a family setting where your husband or your wife or your children want more from you.
Very interesting.
So let's go down that path then. You mentioned just before about how we stay in our executive function rather than operating out of a subconscious operating system. So first of all, can you explain what the executive function is, and then maybe how we stay in that process when we're in a stressful situation?
Great question. This is one of my favourite questions, because the executive function is what we develop through growing and through learning. It's initiated by what's called the prefrontal cortex, which is the front part of the brain. And what a lot of people don't understand, and this might help you explain your teenagers a little bit better, is that it's not fully developed till around the age of 21. So, as parents, when you're expecting your teenagers, especially when the introduction of all the hormones, the social integration, all that kind of stuff, and you expect them to make, cognitively sound, good decisions, they actually don't have a prefrontal cortex fully developed yet. It's being developed, and that's why they've got to go through that teenage period. They're going to make mistakes, but they're developing their prefrontal cortex. And that prefrontal cortex that initiates the executive function. And the executive function is responsible for things like strategic planning, emotional regulation, impulse control, fine motor ability, and most importantly for first responders, context interpretation. So ability to see a stimulus that we may have seen similarly before, but in the context that it is currently in, so that we can make tactically sound, legally defensible decisions that benefit all those involved, or stakeholders, or team members, or people in harm's way, community, all that kind of stuff. We actually have to be able to make those decisions in split seconds, where the people that often are there to critique/criticise our decisions are back in their comfy air-conned offices, in their armchairs, making those quarterback kind of decision. What do you call it?
The Monday morning quarterback.
Yeah, Monday morning quarterback. Yeah.
The armchair critics.
The armchair critics. And they're not in a stressful state. They're in a calm, relaxed environment. So the executive function is the ability to allow the blood, glucose, and oxygen, which is what the brain needs to function, which it gets from our circulation system, to go into that part of the brain to feed it so that it can perform its functions. It then connects with other parts of the brain and does like all this crazy stuff. I don't know if you've ever seen brain scans where certain motions are happening, multiple areas of the brain light up. It's the thing that initiates all those functions, and they're the things that we need as first responders. The amygdala, on the other hand, when the amygdala activates, or it's known as an amygdala hijack, when that gets activated, it competes for the blood, glucose, and oxygen that goes to the prefrontal cortex. It gets greedy and goes, no, we don't actually want decision making. That takes way too long. We want instant, instinctive reactions, and we're there. The amygdala is there for life or death decision-making process, and it's very, very good at that. That's exactly why it's designed. That's exactly how it should be used. And so what it does is it draws the blood, glucose, and oxygen from the extremities, from the digestive system, from the immune system, pulls it away from those areas which aren't important in that life or death situation, and puts it to the heart, to the lungs, to the big muscle groups, the quads, the biceps, for that fight or flight response. But it also draws it from the prefrontal cortex, and in doing so, it shuts down those cognitive decision-making processes. Now, there is a time when you don't want too many decisions going on in your head, but you don't want to go so far in that your amygdala is completely shutting off that ability to be able to get back to there, to have that. So you need to be able to respond quickly, especially in a life or death situation. For you guys, something's happened in a fire where there's someone in immediate danger. They need to be able to instinctively go, no, I've got to move, or I've got to get out, or I've got to go get that person, pull them out. That needs to happen instinctively. But as soon as that happens and you're in that space away from the immediate danger, you need to kick that executive function back in so that you can make those tactically sound, legally defensible decisions that keep the whole team safe.
So how do we do that? How do we redirect?
So glad you asked.
How do we redirect that blood flow from the amygdala back to the prefrontal cortex?
The best way to do it is through the breath. And this is what I love sharing. This is why there's so many different types of breathing techniques out there. The breath is bidirectional. It is a part of the autonomic nervous system where we don't have to think about inhaling, exhaling every second of the day to be able to do it. So it's part of the subconscious, but it also can be consciously controlled. And it's bidirectional, which meaning our mental state will dictate our breathing. So when we get stressed or panicky, we can kind of shallow, sharp, short breaths kind of thing. But our breathing can also influence our state. So if we were then to slow that down, and especially focusing on the exhale, and I'll explain why we focus on the exhale in a little bit, but focusing on the exhale, slowing that whole process down, tells the brain, we're not in stress anymore, we can calm this down. So the reason I advocate for an extended exhale, especially in those critical decision-making, life or death situations where you've just had to move quickly. What's an example of where one of you guys have had to instinctively do something that saved your life or the life of someone else, or the property
It'd be a down firefighter,
Yep.
like
Without
a
a doubt.
BO safety team activation or something like that.
Perfect. So in that moment, stress is high. There is someone at risk. Your stress will go up higher. That will feel good for a little bit. It'll give you the energy, the superhuman power that you need to do whatever you do. If that initiates or goes on too long, or there's a complication in that and your stress level peaks for whatever reason, you can go into an amygdala activation and just go, get out. So you grab your mate. Fortunately, you guys train enough to know muscle memory. You grab your mate, you pull them out, and you guys get out. But then you need, okay, well, what's important now? That's the next decision. In an amygdala function, it's just like, no, I'm safe. I don't need to think anymore. You guys cannot do that. So in that moment, in the critical incident, you've got 1 moment, 1 breath. It's called 1 moment, 1 breath breathing. And in that moment, I would highly advocate for an extended exhale and just going, and then go, what's important now? And so that's something that the QPS teach. It's win-win. What's important now? What's important next? That helps keep you focused on, okay, what have I got to do now? What have I got to do next? That helps your decision-making, your executive function come back online. But that extended exhale, they don't actually teach the extended exhale. Why I advocate for the extended exhale is because the exhale activates the parasympathetic nervous system. So it puts you in that calm digest. It also lowers the heart rate. And what was the other thing? Oh, and it allows the CO2 not to be expelled too quickly. Now, there's a reason I say that. A lot of people go, well, you want to expel the CO2. I'll get to that in a little bit. I just don't want to confuse you too much. So you have an extended exhale so that you can activate your parasympathetic nervous system. It balances out your sympathetic nervous system. You are always going to inhale. You don't have to remember to inhale. That is something that we do quite easily. What we don't do well is a full, proper exhale, getting rid of all that stale air. So exhaling, also for you guys, you're not consuming oxygen in your BA when you're doing an extended exhale. So when you are getting stressed, you're you're consuming a lot more oxygen. The extended exhale will help in that respect. It also lowers your heart rate. And the way it lowers your heart rate is because, especially when you are properly breathing through your diaphragm, when you breathe out, your stomach expands, your diaphragm drops, it opens up the space in the lungs to create more space in the lungs. The lungs can fill out, get more air in, but it also opens up the space around the heart. So the heart expands and allows more, did I say breathe in? I did say breathe in, yeah. So your heart expands and allows more volume of blood in the heart. And when you're breathing in and your heart is expanding and there's a higher volume of blood in the heart to pump around the body, it sends a signal immediately to the brain. These are split second, kind of milliseconds of decisions that I'm making, or signals that are going to the brain to go, you need to beat harder because there's more blood to get around the body. When you exhale, you lower your gut, you squeeze the diaphragm up, it squeezes the air out of the lungs, makes the lungs smaller, makes the space for the heart smaller, there's less volume of blood in the heart, and that sends a signal, okay, you don't have to beat as much. So that's how an exhale can decrease almost immediately a heart rate. So even if you were to do that now, if you were to do a cycle of 4-second inhales, 8-second exhales, and watch your heart rate monitor, you would see after 2 minutes, it would significantly drop. We do that with people in panic attacks, with suffering anxiety attacks that are starting to get stress. You just get them to extend their exhale and their heart rate immediately drops. That breathing immediately influences their mental state and they come back to a point of stasis. So that's why when you've got only 1 moment and 1 breath, choose an extended exhale. To continue on with what I said about the CO2 and why you want that CO2 not to be expelled too much is because, and you guys would know this, the CO2 is actually what sends the signal, CO2 levels send the signal to the chemoreceptors in the back of the brain to breathe. It's not the level of oxygen that tells our brain to breathe, it's the level of CO2. And what we find, especially with police officers who suffer from hypervigilance, they're in their sympathetic nervous system too much. So even if you were to look at the sympathetic nervous system like 1 foot on the accelerator, your sympathetic nervous system, and your parasympathetic would be the brake. So if you're constantly in your sympathetic nervous system with the foot on the accelerator, you're inhaling a lot, you're exhaling quickly, you're getting rid of your CO2 levels, you're over breathing, they call it, because your optimal breath rate is between 5 to 6 breaths per minute, which means a 10-second inhale and exhale cycle. I know this, and I still am not doing that. I'm about a 6-second cycle. But your optimal gas exchange rate, which you guys would be all over, is a 5 to 6 breaths per minute. So when you overbreathe, you actually decrease the level of CO2 in your blood, and it's the CO2 level in your blood, which needs to be around 5%, that helps dissociate the oxygen from the hemoglobin, and allows it to go into the cells where it is needed, into the brain cells, into the muscle cells, into the digestive cells, whatever function it's present to go in. If that CO2 isn't at around that 5%, it's not effectively and efficiently getting as much oxygen from the hemoglobin out of the blood into the cells. And so the quicker you breathe, the more you overbreathe, the more sensitive to CO2, the more you have to breathe, the more CO2 you breathe out when you are breathing, the less CO2 in your blood system, and the less, like, you can have the optimum amount of blood, oxygen on the blood, but if you're not pulling it off, then what's the point? You're just breathing out oxygen. And so anyone that does a VO2 max test, they measure how much oxygen goes in and how much oxygen comes out and how much CO2, and that all equates to health, but it also equates to performance, efficient performance. The other thing with breathing is if we can shift to nasal breathing, there's a lot of added benefits to nasal breathing that help make that that process more efficient. And so nasal breathing is just purely breathing through the nose. The nose only has one function, and that is to get air in. The problem is when a lot of us, especially those in that sympathetic nervous system, the hypervigilant parts of us, or the ones that have a reinforced pattern of breathing through the mouth, anyone with sleep apnea, anyone that snores, chances are you are a mouth breather. I was definitely a mouth breather. You kind of know the mouth breathers because their jaw's a little bit narrower, their chin's a little bit back, like their nose is a little less prominent, because it hasn't been used for so long. So when you're mouth breathing, you are taking in oxygen through the mouth and bypassing all the functions in the nose. And there are specific structures in the nose that help regulate for temperature, pressurization, filtration, and it also releases nasal nitric oxide. And the nasal nitric oxide is what helps pull the oxygen from the air and puts it into the blood. The more nasal nitric oxide you have, which you only get if you breathe through the nose, the more efficient your uptake of oxygen is into the lung system. The more CO2 in the blood, and there is a max, there's 5%. If you go too much, then it's detrimental. So you want a 5% CO2 level approximately in the blood. And when you get close to that level, or when you can stay on that level, the more oxygen you're pulling out of the blood into the cells where you need it. So having that optimal breathing of 5 to 6 breaths per minute will make that whole system efficient, and you can measure that by measuring your VO2 max. It's good for performance as well, and I would imagine that would translate to oxygen consumption.
Wow, that's a lot of information.
Yeah,
really good, really good information though. Thank you. So on a really basic level, when would we have an idea of we need to start breathing properly? What are some of the signs that we might go, oh, I'm using my amygdala at the moment and I'm not using my prefrontal cortex and I'm not in my executive function? I'm fairly certain no firefighter will ever think that. However,
no one.
However, what I'm trying to get at is we go to a job, we turn up at a house fire or something like that, stressful incident. How do we know whether we're making sound decisions or not?
Well, that's the thing. You won't, but your team should. And so it's not necessarily being able to cultivate the self-awareness quickly. You will be able to after a period of time and practice. So the way I would answer that is in two ways. The first one is that it's incumbent on your team members to look for signs of out of character behavior, out of character, poor decision making, erratic behavior, red misting, anger, emotional dysregulation, impulse control seems to be a little bit off. It's up to them who know you, because it's dependent on the person whether a certain behaviour is out of character or not. So it's up to them to go, hey, just breathe, mate. And this is what the tactical guys in QPS do. They will get on the radio and go, breathe, guys. Just everyone breathe. And just have that reminder. So it's not about being able to necessarily identify it. It's about putting those processes in place to remind you, so that because you won't be able to identify it, that you just come back to your breath anyway. So that's the first way. The second way is to proactively, preventatively start a breathing practice so that you can use it when you need it most. Unless you have a neural pathway for a particular type of breathing, you won't be able to use it in stressful situations. Your brain won't be able to access that. But the more you practice it, the more you build that, it's called cortical thickening, the more you build that neural pathway for that particular type of breathing, the more you'll be able to access it when you need it most.
Right, that's excellent. And then how long does it last? How long does the effect of doing this breathing last? Is it an immediate thing, it's gone within 30 seconds, or lasts for a period of an incident?
Well, it really depends on how balanced your autonomic nervous system is. If you're only having to recalibrate a small imbalance, then you're good for, the rest of the day or something like that. There's no arbitrary, this amount of breathing will equate to this amount of effect. In fact, there's some research done by Andrew Huberman's lab. He has a podcast, if you listen to him, brilliant of the neuroscience on this kind of things. He's better than me to talk about this. If you could get him on here.
Yeah, you got his number?
Can you invite me too then? I'll definitely fangirl over him.
I'm sure he's listening.
Yeah.
Hubes, we've got you next, buddy.
You'll definitely want to be invited to that one. So what were we talking about again?
How long,
Distracted
if
me.
you start breathing, how long is it going to last?
So he's shown that there is a particular practice. His team did some research on a number of different practices. So he did a 5-minute practice. What is the best 5-minute practice for overall well-being outside of the breathing practice? And so he tested box breathing, the physiological sigh. I'll explain that in a minute. Cyclic breathing, which is that hyperventilation kind of breathing, and he did something else. I can't remember what the other style of. I think it was just normal breathing. The control was the normal breathing. Mm-hmm. And so he would get people to do 5 minutes of that daily, and then track their overall well-being for the rest of the day. And they found that the best 5-minute practice that gave the most significant results for well-being, balanced autonomic nervous system for the rest of the day outside of the breathing practice was actually the physiological sigh, which does incorporate the extended exhale, but also incorporates the double inhale. And you guys would know about that.
Yeah, I've heard about that, yeah.
Yeah, so that's just take a breath in, and at the top of the breath, take another one, and then extended exhale. So it's still incorporating that same theory. I'm not making this shit up. Like, there's really smart people doing research to support this, and the reason they do, and it's better to listen to Huberman, but I'll bastardize and completely mess up his explanation. But the reason you do the double inhale at the beginning is because it allows you to have that breath in. So it's short, sharp, like full breath, but the little short, sharp breath at the top allows you to just add a little bit more force that pops the alveoli in the lungs open. What happens with the alveoli in the lungs, if you expel the air, the walls collapse on each other, and because there's a surfactant in there, which, as you guys would know, when a balloon with a wet surface inside connects, it takes a little bit more force to open it back up. That little pop at the end, that second inhale at the end of the big inhale, helps give it enough force to pop that open to allow more of that oxygen exchange. So that's why it's called the physiological sigh. We've done it. They've known about this. So Huberman didn't come up with the physiological sigh. They've known about that since the 1930s. I think they realised when they were putting people on intubation to help them, to breathe, they were having rhythmic inhales and exhales, and they were still losing patients. It wasn't until they added every 5 minutes a double inhale, that physiological sigh, that the significance of saving people started to increase. And that's what we do naturally. You'll see animals do it. You'll see yourself doing it. A yawn, you might not necessarily have the distinct double inhale, but you'll have, those bigger, deeper. It's just opening up more of those alveoli sacs in the lungs to get more of that oxygen exchange happening. Because the more, I think someone said if you were to lay out the surface area of those sacs, it's something like a tennis court or something like that big. So if some of those are closed, you're getting less exchange. And so you want to optimize that.
So just touching on, I think, where Tim was going with it. So let's say on a day-to-day basis, whether it be in QPS world or fire service world, I get up in the morning, I have my breakfast. Is it beneficial for me to do a process of breathing, or do I wait till I turn into that street with the house roaring and do I start my breathing technique then, or put it into an assessment world? Is that prior to assessment doing that breathing process then? And I think that's where you were aiming with the longevity of a morning routine.
Gotcha.
Or is it, like you mentioned the CERT guys before, when do they utilise that breathing technique?
Yeah, so they can do it. The best thing about simple breath techniques is that you can do it before the job, and that's what they will do. They'll call over the radio, go, boys, breathe, and then they'll all, it's just their cue. During an incident, they'll go, boys, breathe. Like, just, you can do it before, during, after. There is no restrictive nature for simple breath breathing. The more complicated breathing, like the physiological sigh, where you're kind of thing, probably look a bit dumb, and so they probably wouldn't necessarily do that one. They just focus on those really good balanced inhales or the extended exhales. But having a morning practice is the best way to create that neural pathway thickening, because sometimes when you're on that job or going towards that job, you've got so many things running around your mind, and you're actually talking, so you can't do your breathing, especially if you're the station officer, is that the SO in the truck? You are thinking, you can't think to breathe as well, and potentially you'll be the one going, hey, boys, breathe, and not actually doing it yourself. So having a practice on the car on the way into work, that's a really, because you're getting there and you're doing it, and you're not having to do anything else, is a good way. So I would say, if I'm going to be greedy, yes, all times that you've just mentioned is when you would do it.
I think maybe another key time, Mandy, would be on the way home.
Yes.
What a great transition if
Recovery.
you've had a stressful shift, to reset that
Yep.
nervous system before you get home to your loved ones. Or
Absolutely.
like that.
And you know what, whenever I feel myself starting to get stressed about a decision, or, all these bills coming in or something like that, I just naturally now just go, and I notice myself doing it. I don't have to consciously think that. So every single time, the more you integrate it into your everyday life, which doesn't detract from you doing other things, when you're training is another really good way. It's really good for improving your HRV. So doing the physiological, if you're a weights trainer or resistance trainer, doing the physiological side between sets, you wouldn't do that type of breathing whilst you're lifting heavy. You would still stay with your normal lifting breathing, but it's between sets. If you did that, what that does is it allows your heart rate to drop quickly. And when your heart rate drops quickly from the working set, you increase your HRV, and an increased HRV or higher HRV is actually a healthier, more balanced HRV, because it's the HRV is heart rate variability. So the difference between your heartbeats is always going to be different. The more extreme that is, the more you know that your brake and your accelerator are working effectively. So you want a high. And what that is will depend on your age and your gender and that kind of stuff. And there are scales out there. Watches will program it for you, and they will measure your HRV while you sleep to get a good, accurate indicator. But I will always check that to make sure, my autonomic nervous system is balanced today, or no, it's not. So I'm going to do some extra meditation or breath work or whatever that is.
That's great. I think that's a really good thing. Good point Josh brought up about heading home from a job too. A lot of the time I think we go home from a stressful day or nasty incidents or whatever, come home to our family, don't know really how to integrate that experience. So maybe this is a great thing for listeners to take away from this, to take back to their loved ones, that maybe they can remind them to do these sort of things when they come home and they've experienced something a bit traumatic.
Because the unfortunate thing with first responders is that they're on all the time at work. So when they go home, that is their parasympathetic nervous system. But their family needs them to be a little bit on too. So they're coming home and they're either switching off, going into distraction mode in front of the TV, or just, grabbing a beer, sitting on the deck, or, just doing something that de-escalates, because the busy day that you've had. But your family hasn't had that stressful busy day. Your family wants their dad or their husband or their boyfriend or their sibling to come home and still be on and wanting to do something. So it will either do two things. It will either disengage you or disconnect you from your family, because you do need that recovery time and you're taking it when you get home because that's where you feel the safest, or it will make you go back up again. And so you're not getting that recovery period. And the thing is, you don't have to, push that sympathetic nervous system up to the peak again in order for you to get some, there are certain things like engaging with your children, hugging them, and colouring with them. Those are good activities, stress completion activities that you can implement with them, so that you're spending time with them, but you're still able to activate your recovery mode and balancing and completing your stress cycle. So finding something that you can do with them creatively or physically, or all that sort of stuff, and integrating them as a part of your stress completion process might be the way that you help balance the first responder lifestyle with the home lifestyle, because every first responder needs that loving, supporting social layer, social circle, family layer around them, but they're the ones that probably cop the most disengaged version of that person, and so they don't stick around too long if they're copying that all the time.
Yep. To me, this is all hinges around that heart rate, and you see so many different things that happen. And in that training world, me and a colleague, we'd say, people can't be that silly. Why are they doing these things? And then it wasn't until we started investigating, you mentioned earlier about, I've got to think of it now, but as the heart rate gets higher, things start happening to the brain. One of the biggest things I see is if there's a stressful situation, a person will default back to where they're comfortable. So an example of that is a station officer, or learning to be a station officer, controlling an incident ground. That becomes too stressful, and all of a sudden they'll disappear and start peeling off hose from the hose room. We go, why are they doing it? Because that was them as a firefighter. That's where they were comfortable. So it's all that default process. Auditory exclusion was another one you mentioned earlier, and that to me was, you would tell them a bit of information 20 times and it would not go in. And auditory, apart from the auditory exclusion, the hallucination, reverse hallucination, where you're seeing things that are there. Or you're not seeing things that are there. And that's all to do with the heart rate. And exactly what you're talking about here, I think, is pivotal, vital for us to be doing as first responders, and making. I've always been a big believer, if you're making a critical decision under stress, potentially it's going to be the wrong one.
And there is a practice that I believed helped me with the tunnel vision and the auditory exclusion, and it's a mindfulness technique of 5 things you can see, 4 things you can hear, 3 things you can touch, 2 things you can smell, 1 thing you can taste. But what I do with that is I will go something close and then something far away, and you practice that, it gets that neural pathway of going, I'm close, now I go far away. I'm listening close to me, and now I'm listening far away, and it builds that neural pathway of going, okay, what's close to me, what can I hear far away, and it kind of builds that in, so that when you need it, you have access to going, oh, close, far away. This is what I'm seeing close. This is what I'm seeing far away, and it's really good as a practice to have a break from looking at a computer screen, but it's really, really good for practicing that in-out, tunneled to peripheral vision kind of stuff, and hopefully building that neural network, a neural pathway, so that you can use it when you need it most. The stronger it is, the more access you have to it when you're flicking things through to your subconscious programs.
Well, that's good advice. I like that, because that's one of our Achilles, heels, is that not seeing things, and it's good advice. I'll use it. What
I was going to ask you, Mandy, was obviously you've gone through this journey of sort of self-discovery, and you've found all these brilliant techniques and strategies that have worked for you.
Yeah.
You've shared a couple with us. If someone listening to this, if we've spiked their interest and they want to know more, where are some really easy, tangible, where do I go to get started on this journey? Like, what do you recommend?
Well, I have a lot of book recommendations for people to do with breathing. Breathe by James Nestor is probably one of my biggest go-tos. I love that book. It taught me the value of nasal breathing and how to decrease my heart rate. It wasn't until I left the police that I actually realised how bad my heart rate was, because I hated watches. I never wore a watch. And then I just wore my husband's to train one day, just out of curiosity to see how I would go after reading that book. And my average heart rate, my resting average heart rate, was just sitting down watching a TV, was 90 beats per minute, which is ridiculous. And I had no idea because I felt normal. I've now been able to, I'm about 80 now, but I can regularly get it down to around the 60. He's ridiculous. He's like at around 40 or some, he's got a ridiculous VO2 max. He's really annoying. He's one of those like effortlessly healthy people. So I actually needed to start wearing my wearable to actually track that. So Breathe by James Nestor was a huge aid in my understanding and learning and embodying this. The Buteyko breathing by Patrick McEwen. He does podcasts and he has some books. So it's about like extending, getting your breathing back to its optimal breathing rate. Podcasts by Andrew Huberman, Gary Brecker, who else is there? Kyle Kingsbury. They all address these kinds of topics. But even if you were just to Google breathing for first responders, I don't know. I think I did. I didn't think there was many. We have released a mini-series on our podcast with the QPS, and it's called Under the BS, which is blue shirt, but, you know, there's some BS there too. Mm-hmm. And they're all techniques to support the human that have to put on the uniform. So we've got that just kind of starting. You've got, I will share things on my MindWix Instagram page, just little breathing techniques. I do a lot of work with police in terms of stress adaptation. So I developed a stress mastery program to help support the human that has to do these constant, because I see even the guys that are doing like stress response training and adrenaline stress consistently, I see how they can also get burnt out. And so I created a stress mastery program that incorporated the new fad at the moment, which is breathwork and ice bath, particularly the ice bath, to see whether how they would perform in those adrenaline stresses with breathwork and ice bath stuff. That has proven quite significantly good. I also spoke to Josh about doing a few little pilot experiments, seeing whether breathwork would reduce your oxygen consumption on BA, and that seemed to work. You know, had some significant.
Yeah, so we ran a very small, like I said, pilot just with the guys on shift, and we did see some really good effect on oxygen consumption in BA. Basically, we just ran like a PT session, for want of a better word, in BA, and basically ran them through that session, brought them back, and then gave a very brief, overview on breathing. Much of the stuff you touched on today, gave them a couple of techniques, and essentially just focusing on that exhale when you're in BA and identifying certain times and periods where you can take advantage of that.
Yep.
Because certainly when you're working really hard, it's very difficult
Yep.
to do that. But we ran that same session again after we onboarded that knowledge to the guys, and we found that we did use less oxygen, but we also had a significant decrease in their heart rate post exercise.
Wow.
So they doffed their BA, and there was a marked decrease in their heart rate. So they got through the same amount of work in a similar time frame, but when they came out, obviously when you're talking about those sympathetic, parasympathetic nervous systems, they're going to be far better regulated, and then their recovery is going to be much better as well. So.
Absolutely. That's perfect. That's great. So I do believe you might be interested in doing a bit more research around that, which I think will be phenomenal, and especially in the context that you guys, like your BA is life-saving and can be life limiting if circumstances arise in that way. So I think that's brilliant. There is a book, there is a submarine, I don't know if you guys heard of it, about the two submarinists that survived 72 hours on what should have only been a day's worth of oxygen because they incorporated these breathing techniques. And I'll try to find it for you. It was phenomenal that they would just do long extended exhales. They would do some quick cyclic breathing, and then breath holds, and they were able to extend, it might have been 48 hours of oxygen, and they managed to extend it to 74 hours or something like that. Which should
Amazing.
not have happened.
And directly applicable to us when you think about if we're trapped or,
Yes.
we're in a certain situation where we've got a finite amount of air available to us.
Yep.
Perfect time to be able to employ some of those techniques.
For those scientific nerdlingers like me out there, there's some good research by Dr. Jack Feldman as well. He's a guest on Huberman a couple of times, I think, but he has a lot of good research that supports proactive preventative breathing techniques to allow you to manage stress better in general. So getting back to what I was talking about before with the stress mastery program that we have stress adaptive breathing, and stress adaptive breathing is the kind of breathing that actually does stress your body. So breath work in terms of the hyperventilation, it's called cyclic breathing. There's other names like Tumo breathing, pranayama breathing, Kriya, all those like where you and then you do extended breath holds, Wim Hof method. So that is actually a hormetic stressor. We would categorize that type of breathing. So the other breathing that I was talking about today, they're just breathing techniques. Breath work is a hormetic stressor that pushes your body to two extremes. It pushes it to really over-oxygenated extreme and then a really high carbon dioxide extreme. And in doing that, so you do that, you over-oxygenate, or you have like high levels of oxygen and really low levels of CO2, so you're not getting the oxygen from the blood into the body on one extreme when you're doing the rapid breathing, and then you'll do the breath hold, which will slowly start allowing the CO2 to increase, allowing that oxygen in the blood to come off into the system, and then start building up to the point where it's not liking it going above or towards that sensitivity that your chemoreceptors have already established within yourself, and it's different for every person. So that's called a hormetic stressor, and a hormesis is a natural process we have as humans used to create adaptation, and it's where we face a stress. That stress triggers a need to change. And then in the period of rest and recovery after that stress is when it gets rewired and changed physiologically, so that when we come back to that stress, we meet it better. That's why when you practice breath work, your breath holds get longer, your CO2 tolerance gets higher. And so training is another good example of a hormetic stressor, where it's acute, controlled stress with a period of recovery afterwards. So acute, controlled, it triggers the need to change, grow muscles, you have the recovery, that's when all the work happens. Without that recovery, there is no benefit to it. So that, if I can get any message across, if we're going to use hormesis or hormetic stresses as a way to improve our stress management or our stress mastery, then you must make sure that the recovery period is in place, and that's the only place that stuff gets rewired and physiologically changed. And so that's what breath work can do. So I would be interested to see what 1 or 2 weeks of breath work would do in general. We noticed an immediate difference in the guys at QPS that were about to do their adrenaline stress scenarios, where we put them through breath work. And breath work is cool because you get a lot of dopamine, adrenaline, like mood elevation. It increases immunity response, and good immunity response reduces inflammation. So there's a lot of other positive aspects. And then we chuck them in an ice bath, which is another hormetic stressor. It puts your body to temperature extremes, and then you get out again, acute controlled stress. Get out for recovery, they get that 4.5 times more mood elevation, that dopamine. There is this saying out there that cocaine has a dopamine hit for like 9 minutes, whereas an ice bath will have the same dopamine hit for like 4 to 5 hours afterwards. So cocaine is not really acceptable in our line of work.
Hard to carry an ice bath around in your pocket, though.
It is a little bit. Cold showers, everything. But it will set you up. It will set your mood for the rest of the day. So these are all really proactive morning strategies or before shift strategies. If you're on night shift and you want to stay alert and awake, jump in an ice bath. It will immediately get you into shift your circadian rhythm back to, it's go time. I won't explain that. There's so much in why that does that. But having those two powerful combinations of two hormetic stresses, and I personally will stack a third, and that's when I train. So I'll do breath work, ice bath, then train. You'd never do an ice bath after resistance or strength and conditioning training because you'll shortcut any gains that you intend to make. You would do it before. If you were running, long endurance kind of stuff, you can do that, ice bath after that for muscle recovery and stuff like that. You will still get the muscle recovery for resistance training if you ice bath before, because it's, that next day or second day DOMS that starts to really hurt you. You jump in the ice bath the day after training. That's your recovery, but it's also amping you up for your next training session as well. So that's just a little tidbit in that, but that's where I like to focus on. And if I want to encourage people to be proactive in their mental health and well-being, because people are like, yeah, I'll get to that. But first responders are notorious for putting others before themselves, putting work before themselves. So the way I like to I guess, market this to them and appeal to them with this is it's performance-focused well-being strategies. Not only is it helping your well-being and your mental health, but it's also improving your performance cognitively, professionally, performance in the job, in the training session, whatever it is. So you get a win-win situation with these kinds of things.
So I think for me anyway, Mandy, hearing you talk, there's a couple of key elements there. Is, like you said, it is going to enhance our performance, but it's also no good waiting to the moment to try and implement these things. So we've got to try and create some really healthy habits, but in and around things that we're already doing.
Yeah.
So it's not a huge shift in what we're doing and how we're doing our life.
Yep.
It's just little bits here and there to make sure that we're doing things consistently, so we can draw on them when we.
Absolutely. And I love that. It's like you don't wait till you're drowning to learn how to swim. It's that simple. And it's those 1% daily changes that, I don't know if you've ever read the book Atomic Habits, but he has this graph where it just like kind of plateaus. You won't see much of change, and then it just peaks. And that's 1% daily changes over 365 days. So
for all the finance nerds, that's compound interest.
Okay, I'm not the only nerd here. I'm so happy. Excellent.
Probably, how do we reach Mandy if we...
Yeah, I was going to say, give yourself a free plug, YouTube plug.
Yeah, well, we've only just kind of started our own podcast, so it'll be under the BS or UTBS for the podcast we're doing with the Queensland Police, but it does apply to first responders, and we're going to tap into you guys for ours as well. So it's going to be a bit of a win-win for us. And Mindwix on Instagram, I'm not a good poster, but when I do post it, it's stuff that is actually helpful.
Quality over quantity.
Yeah. I'm not huge on social media, but I will put out things that, help first responders and little reminders with breathing and little strategies. So
Fantastic. Excellent. Well, it's really great having you here, Mandy.
My pleasure.
I've taken heaps from it. I am sure that everyone listening has also done the same. So thank you very much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom with us.
I apologise. I am notorious for what we call sci-splaining, which is like mansplaining but worse, because we use a lot of scientific terminology and no one understands what you're talking about. But that is my passion. And sorry for you guys. I tried to simplify it as best as I could.
I didn't actually understand any of it. But you've got a nice voice, so that's good.
Excellent. Thank you.
No, thank you very much.
No worries.
Thanks, Mandy.
Okay, one last thing. We're back. Mandy has just got the 6th of the list of ways to complete our stress cycle.
Yes, I promised you 6. I gave you 5, and now I'm giving you the 5th. And we've saved the best for last because it is laughing. And humour is one of the most important things. unfortunately, you guys are like us. You have a very black humour, so we've got to hide that from the media. But you can now say, Mandy said, to complete my stress cycle, I need to laugh.
must laugh.
And black humour is funny.
Very good.
Evidence-based.
Perfect. So they were, the
Yes,
six of them were.
Let's recap them, shall we?
Exercise.
You guys. Yep. Exercise.
That's mine, your turn.
Creativity.
Nice.
Tears.
Yes. I hope you practice that one when we're gone.
All the time.
Can we call them tactical teams?
Tactical tears for the.
Well, there was tactical touch, wasn't there? Or
Hugs.
connection?
Yeah.
Yep.
Hugs.
Combat cuddles.
Combat cuddles. Oh, I love it. I'm stealing that. Tactical tears, combat cuddles. Done.
How many are we up to?
You got 5. You got
Laughter.
one more.
And then laughter.
No, you got one more. You haven't said one more.
It's
the only thing we've been
go.
We're saving it for the content expert, Mandy.
breathing. Conscious breathing.
Talking about it the last
What the
I
whole
feel
session is
like
about.
I have failed. I am going with my head hanging shame. You guys didn't listen to a word. You know when I said, you guys would know this? I just want to tell you guys, they were all looking at me with blank looks like, yeah, of course we do.
We knew it. Oh, no. Thank you, Mandy.
No worries.
Again, greatly appreciated.
Thank you.
My pleasure.